Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is Friday, February 25th, 2022 in Sanibel, Florida. And my conversation this week is with a longtime guest on the show, back when we were doing this every week, 13 years ago, James McQuivey of Forrester Research. You're going to hear that James has a new title at Forrester, which is an interesting development in his long career with that company based in Boston. And I was looking forward to talking with James about some of the things that we've talked about so many times in the past, Amazon, the pandemic, the future of work, which is an area that he has a real specialty on. But as I was getting ready to talk to him a week ago today on February 18th, I came across a brand new project that he's doing, and it's an investigation of masculinity based on actual survey research that he conducted, actually 2 surveys, national surveys, talking to men and women about masculinity. And it is fascinating. I have been watching all of the videos in it, and you'll find it at a Substack newsletter, and there'll be links in the show notes to it. It's called Year of Living Manly, and it's just, I don't want to kind of spoil your experience of it by telling you more than this, that it's a data-based investigation of masculinity, and the implications of it are something that I have been living with ever since I talked with James and I did this research in my own life. You know, what would it mean if I was a 5 instead of a 4 in answering a question? And the question is, I consider myself to be very masculine, and a 5 is, I agree very much with that. And a 4 is not so much, and all the way down to a 1. And it turns out that the 41% of U.S. males that rate themselves a 5 and say, yes, I am very masculine, are kind of different than the stereotypes would lead you to think. And therein lies some opportunity for growth and kind of mind-bending ways of thinking about being in the world. So this was a real treat for me, and it was a surprise. You're going to hear about this at the start of the conversation, and then we do talk about the pandemic and Amazon and other things, the future of work, technology. But if you have any interest in diving deeper, I really recommend that you check out his newsletter and watch just at least one of these videos, because I think you might find it interesting. And some of the friends that I have that are following the Alexa flash briefing that I do, Morning Journal, have reached out to me and said, well, I'm a 4, I'm a 5. And, it sparked some...
I'm not sure.
Alexa, stop. It sparked some fun conversations in my circle, and I think that it's likely to do so for lots of people who are following it. So we spoke by Zoom on Friday, February 18th, and I began by asking James about the genesis or the early inklings of his Year of Living Manly project.
That's a really important question, because my early questioning of what it means to be a man started when I was a boy. I've mentioned before in some of my videos that I grew up in a small community, a wonderful community. And however, it was not a community where there was a lot of room for young boys to be different from the norm. We were all supposed to play the same sports. We were all supposed to have, honestly, this is when Adidas shoes first came out. And if you didn't have the 3 stripes on your shoes, they would call you names in the community where I grew up. That was when Nike came out, and everyone's like, what is that? That's not the 3 stripes of Adidas. So it was a very conforming community. And I just didn't happen to enjoy all the sports that everyone around me was playing and cared so much about. I also didn't have a father who wanted to go outside and teach me how to block a tackle. That was just not something he wanted to do. He was trying to run a small business during the inflation years of the 70s, and it was a very, very difficult time for him. And, I look back about what kind of father I had, and I am very grateful for the father that I had and all that he put into raising us 3 boys. But he never said, when the kids make fun of you, you got to punch them down and show them who's who, and show them that you're a man. That was never my father. But there were other fathers in our town who were like that, and in our neighborhood, who, if the boy came home crying because he'd been teased, he'd say, well, here's how to punch him in the nose, and here's how to show him. I mean, it sounds stereotypical, but it was. Our little community was very stereotypical. So I grew up understanding that my sense of what it takes to be a man was different, and from what others in my immediate environment thought it was. And then, of course, I was in that era in the 70s where you would drink up anything you could possibly get over this mysterious thing called the television. And I would see different models of masculinity in television. And then I would see what I came to embrace as the idea of the quiche eating man. I don't know if you remember this book. It was called Real Men Don't Eat Quiche.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, I've got the copy of it around here somewhere. And I remember being like, we kind of need to take traditional masculinity down a notch, and we need to elevate this, softer, more new age, sensitive masculinity. We need to elevate that. And I think that's the point at which I departed from what I think a healthier version of that narrative could have been. I went in the direction of, I need to be soft. I need to be vulnerable, which, by the way, I am fine with and I like. But it doesn't have to be to the exclusion of being strong and being someone that others can look to as a protector and a provider. And that's where I think I went wrong at an early age. And it did fine for me. I mean, I went to grad school. Being able to talk openly about feelings and things in grad school is a huge advantage. If I was the strong, silent type, I don't know that I would have made it. I wouldn't have wanted to go to grad school and get a PhD in social sciences anyway. So understand that everything that I see as not traditionally masculine about my own upbringing, I value. The mistake I made was not also valuing the core virtues of masculinity, which are ability to take risk, willingness to extend yourself on the behalf of others, even if it might harm you. I mean, that's the combination of risk and protector that traditional masculinity embodies. And by the way, I say this now with some confidence because I've done now 2 rounds of surveys. My original wave was 2019. This 2021 was kind of the pandemic has happened. What has happened to men during the pandemic and women, of course. But and with 2 waves of data, I've got, over 2,500 people that I've now learned from. And what I've found is that I was wrong. The overly simple, you can either be a strong man but not a good one, or you can be an emotional man and therefore a good one. That's wrong. The best men among us are the men who find the ability to express both of those things. And this was eye-opening to me. And it's one of the reasons I thought I need to reveal this to people. And I get a lot of pushback from people who just can't quite understand that. They want to see masculinity as a spectrum where the bad guys are all the way on one end and the good guys are somewhere in the middle. Like masculine enough, but not too masculine, because then they become bad. But the data don't agree with that.
So when you say the best men, is that measures of happiness, success? How are you picking those out and then asking questions about how they tick?
Every single measure of thriving, whether it's individual thriving, and that can be their own health, their own well-being, their own happiness, life satisfaction, their relationship satisfaction, longevity of relationships, intensity of relationships, dependence, how much they emotionally connect to their partners, if they're married, relationships with their children if they have them, and relationships with their parents if their parents are still alive. All of those things are richer and better for men who rank themselves 5 out of 5 on this scale.
That's fascinating. And it was a high number.
Well, it's a very high number. It's 41% of men see themselves as, 5 out of 5 strongly agree that they are very masculine. And that just also shocked me. I just thought it would be a normal curve where the people who were 5 out of 5 were like some 20% of men or something like that. But it's not. It's 41%. And, and I'm a 4 out of 5. That's the thing. None of this is me trying to say, hey, I want people to value me. I'm trying to teach myself.
Go fours.
Yes, exactly. Well, and fours can be great. That's the thing. It's not like you have to be a 5 in order to have a good life. It is that you are more likely to have those extra benefits if you are a 5. And so it's causing me to say, well, what is it about being a 5 that I've been afraid of?
Yeah.
Why have I said, well, I don't ever want to learn how to do what, and it's the easiest example is just looking at something like boxing, which I'm going to try this year. I have friends who are into mixed martial arts. I'm not going to try that. I'll do boxing. That's as far as I'll go. Yeah. But the fact that there are men, friends of mine, people I respect and that I know, who relish the idea of getting in a ring and trying to punch someone in the face is completely anathema to who I am and what I've prided myself on being. And yet they tell me that it's incredibly satisfying to go and test yourself in that way. And I think, okay, I need to explore that. So, I mean, that's kind of gimmicky on that one. And in my survey, I didn't ask how many people have ever been hit in the face or hit someone else in the face. And so I can't prove that actually correlates with being 5 out of 5 on my scale. But I'm recognizing that I could learn from some of those attributes that I don't currently have.
And so, say the boxing or other things, and I can picture, what would move me toward considering myself a 5, but what would be the benefit of being free from kind of the timidity to say, yes, I believe I'm masculine and I'll try boxing, I'll try this, without having to change your number? What are the advantages that you expect to get, for example, by trying boxing? What's going to improve in your life?
You've hit the nub of it. For me, I think I've identified the parts of traditional masculinity that I am personally hesitant to explore, and one of them is risk-taking. So this is something that my data show very, very clearly, the personality attributes that very masculine men have that I don't. One of them is the willingness to take risk. I'm very risk averse. I'm not, and that's funny. My wife is having an interesting time experiencing this with me because she'll say like, well, but you take risks and I was like, yes, I do. But you have no sense of what the internal issues are for me every time I take a risk, how I have to plan it carefully. I have to anticipate all the issues that might come out. It has affected the way I make career decisions. It's affected the way I make life decisions. And that's probably all fine. I don't necessarily need to change that. But having the mental flexibility to experience risk occasionally, I think would be very, very beneficial for me. And it already has shaped even some of the things that I've done this year outside of the project. It has shaped me having moments where I've said, how would someone who's more comfortable with risk approach this conversation or this decision? And it's given me more mental flexibility. And I'm going to say this, that one of the keys of being a 5 out of 5 is that they evidence more mental flexibility. And
interesting.
I haven't gotten to this point yet, so I'll give you a little bit of a sneak preview. And all of this work is separate from my work at Forrester, I should say. I want to disclose this is not something that Forrester supports or is involved in. And so separate from that, the thing that I haven't gotten to yet is that I've identified what I sort of imagine the masculine plus feminine strengths of these very masculine men. Because what happens is that men who are very masculine, in many, many cases, they are what you think a man is, like willing to take risks, to a higher degree. They are more likely to take risk than the average man, who already is more likely to take risk than the average woman. But there are many, many dimensions where it is the inverse of that. Where very masculine men actually, statistically speaking, are more like women than they are like other men.
Wow.
In their desire to nurture, in their desire to be generous, in ways that, how much they volunteer in their community, how much money they give to charity, all of these things, much more like women than they are like other men. And so to me, that's the nut of it. Because I don't want to suddenly say, I need to walk around like a caveman. I want to preserve the goodness of everything that I've gotten by being more open to a feminine side. Sides maybe even the wrong word. I want to question that. But, feminine aspects of my character, and I want to integrate them with these more masculine aspects that other people have. So if I know of people, as I do, who are extremely, obviously masculine in ways that everyone would assume stereotypically, oh, well, that's a masculine man, that's what you're trying to go for. If I also happen to know that that man is not someone who is generous, who is not someone who is willing, actually, the willingness to be emotional, very masculine men call themselves emotional at roughly the same rate as women do on average.
Wow.
Whereas the non-masculine men are less willing to describe themselves as emotional. So some of these things are just really worth unpacking. And it's a personal journey for me, but obviously behind it, I think, what are we missing as a society when we try to cast men into, well, if you are too much of a man, you're a bad one. And so don't be that. It's like, well, actually being too much of a man means being open to all of these things and being able to use all of these attributes in ways that I think, and I can prove, benefit society.
Do you see a similar, this is a surprising and wonderful phenomenon that you've identified about very masculine men that consider themselves women? Would they surprise us by having more of a risk profile like men, that they would, because they're in touch with their femininity, it loops around and it brings them kind of some of the attributes that we consider masculine?
So let me clarify. Did you mean very masculine or very feminine women?
Very feminine women.
Okay, yeah. So I did the same thing with women, 5 out of 5 scale.
Yeah.
I haven't been reporting on any of that because, frankly, there's just so much data here, and maybe that's next year's project. Interestingly, it's a smaller percent of women who consider themselves very feminine. And the strength of relationship between all of these benefits is lower. It's still there. So the group of women who are 5 out of 5 consider themselves very feminine. It has a similarly higher degree of satisfaction with their lives, satisfaction with their relationships, and so on. Some of the same kinds of benefits. But it's not as strong. It's not as linear a relationship. And that I find very fascinating. But yes, they also have masculine characteristics that we would say, oh, well, you call yourself very feminine. That must mean that you're prim and proper and you don't, the stereotypes that we begin to apply, we do almost automatically. But really what we're seeing there on the same side is that very masculine men and very feminine women also conceive of themselves more expansively in their lives than we certainly allow them to stereotypically. If a woman is defined by others as very feminine, we usually mean we put her in a small box.
Yeah.
And what the truth is, the woman who sees herself as very feminine has put herself in a bigger box. And that's what's happening with men. We keep saying, oh, you're a very masculine man. That means you have a narrow set of capabilities. But it's actually not true. The men who see themselves as very masculine have put themselves in a bigger box and maybe aren't even in a box at all. And that's what I'm trying to explore.
That's fascinating. And you're calling it a year of living manly. So every other week, or do you have you assigned yourself a practice of how often you'll be talking about this throughout the year?
I'm trying to do it every week. I've been successful until this last weekend. The video that I have queued up for last weekend is a great video. I've asked a friend who actually is an intern at the Minnesota Twins to explain to me why baseball is something I should care about.
Oh, I want to watch that one.
It was a great conversation, and he's a very insightful young man. He's a friend of our family, and I just haven't had the chance to edit that video and get it posted. But basically, I'm going to try to get one every week, and if not every other week for a while here. I mean, we have a family wedding coming up next week, which raises the question, like, are very masculine men more likely to marry and stay faithful? I've done that video. They are. So, I'll be at my son's wedding and I'll be saying, hey, he's demonstrating his capacity for masculinity here, choosing to commit to a life partner.
I love the one you did. you were in the blizzard asking yourself questions, and the indoor you was answering the questions. You're clearly having some creative fun. I am,
and that's another thing. That's a part of me that I've always associated with the more feminine characteristics, as being creative and expressive. And so, but if I can embrace all of these aspects, if I can put myself in that bigger box, then I can both talk about learning how to box people in the face and be expressive and creative at the same time, and have the best of both.
Is there a website that has a name in it?
Not a Well, you can go to my Substack, jamesmcquivey.substack.com.
Okay.
And it's just a free Substack.
Newsletter.
Yeah, free newsletter. And whenever I post a video, I'll post it in there.
Yeah.
I'll also usually add a little bit of extra technical detail to the Substack so you can see the data more clearly.
Oh, yeah.
Me being who I am, I could spend an hour talking about a single graph and what it means statistically and how I derived all the measures. And I try not to do that because I don't think most people care about that. But I do want people to understand this is not just a teen Vogue survey. This is it's the same quality of work that I would do for a client who's paying me $250,000.
If I worked at Vogue, I would commission a McQuivey survey just to increase the credibility of teen Vogue. And people would always say, what? McQuivey did this survey? My God. That'd be a good retirement project.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. It's been almost a year since we talked back in April. And since I know you've studied the history of pandemics, I thought I would ask you, when the history books are written about COVID-19, what do you think they'll say was the most important change that it led to in the U.S. and in the world?
Well, number one, we're not going to have learned the kind of public health lessons that you would hope we learn. You'd hope that if we have another pandemic in 10 years, we will have learned exactly how to deal with it. And we're human and human systems are flawed. So we probably won't have learned those things, but there will be people who will remember them and you'll be able to find them on Wikipedia. So hopefully it won't be as painful a process of going through the details to say, oh, right, we learned this about how to communicate these risks. We learned this about how to not overemphasize things that we don't know for sure. Like we over sanitized. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
We washed everything way too much. Did that hurt us? Probably not, but it did hurt our credibility later on when some people were like, why are we doing all these extra measures? Remember the ones you did as we did all that hygiene theater early on. So those kinds of things, we're just not going to learn them. And maybe that's okay. Honestly, the biggest change that we're going to experience from all of this is realizing that when we really want to, we can apply science in novel and innovative ways to solve major problems. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I hope we come away from this with is, okay, which problems are we going to tackle next with that level of commitment? I mean, public health issues have always been with us and will always be with us, but we just showed that we could mobilize a tremendous amount of resources, advance the science, in particular mRNA, vaccines and research. That research is going to be tremendously useful overall. So that's probably the biggest change that's going to occur. Now, whatever political issues happen in this time, which are still happening. I mean, we're watching Canada go through the whole vaccine mandate protests from the truckers and everything. Whatever political changes occur during this, those will probably be lasting and durable just because we're at an inflection point where that matters. But in the end, no one will really think of that as having been caused by, the health issue, the pandemic itself. They'll think it was, the political tensions, which of course have been building for some time. I mean, Donald Trump was president before the pandemic, so this tension in the United States, also Brexit happened before the pandemic. All of these things were already underway before the pandemic, and we'll just see where the pandemic leads them next.
Yeah. Last time we talked, we talked about Jeff Bezos's last letter to shareholders, which was in June of 2019, actually, and this surprising new articulation of a vision for Amazon to be the world's best workplace and the safest place to work. And I thought your comments about the world's best workplace were fascinating because, it could be data, but there's problems if, Amazon is Big Brother. And I frankly haven't seen anything surface in the past year. If they're doing things that advance that vision, they don't appear to be, bragging about them, putting them out on their social media or trying to win any points with the public. But have you, in your conversations, I know you know a lot of people at Amazon, any word on that bold new vision that he articulated almost, more than 2 years ago?
What's really happening is Amazon has decided to play it much closer to the vest because everything they do gets criticized, and everything Bezos does gets criticized. You can't take Captain Kirk to the edge of space without just getting laughed at and all of that. But what they're emphasizing publicly is the incredible benefits that people get when they work at Amazon, and they're usually emphasizing warehouse and delivery benefits, because for jobs like that to get full benefits on day one, very unusual. And their benefits package is very generous. I mean, this is one of the things that allowed them to ride one of the potential unionization drives that occurred at a particular warehouse, was that many of the people who worked there were saying, I'm already getting the best benefits I've ever had in my whole life. And what else are you going to offer me, union organizers? And what risks are you putting us through in order to get these benefits that I've already got? Now, whatever side you're on that discussion, that is a reasonable strategy. Make sure that the people get more than they expect to get, and they're less likely to be upset at you. Then I think that's been true across the board. Interestingly, just last 2 weeks, Amazon announced that for its desk jobs, which they've been quiet about for some time, they're now taking the maximum ceiling for the pay up significantly. Being paid to work at Amazon in a desk or an office role, Amazon has always said from the beginning of the pandemic, we will be an in-office company when this is all over. They bought a whole bunch of real estate in New York at the beginning of the pandemic when the rates were very favorable. And so these people who now work for Amazon or have been working for Amazon are saying, well, wait a minute. Everywhere else is saying, come to work for Facebook, come to work for whoever, and never come back to the office again if you don't want to. So Amazon is essentially having to say, we are going to be an in-office culture, and we're going to make sure that we pay you for that that burden that we're placing on. They're not saying it that way, but if you just look at the market, that's what they're having to do. They're having to raise the ceiling. Now, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes on how much equity they're giving people. That's also a big motivator for working for Amazon, is that equity is worth a lot for certain roles, at least. I will say this. Word on the street is that if you're a software developer in Palo Alto or Seattle, you're going to get 3 calls a week from an Amazon recruiter right now.
Wow.
And it's partly because they're growing and their ambitions are strong, and it's partly because a lot of people are saying, I'm not sure I want to work here if you're going to go make me sit in a cubicle and do what I've done in my home for the last 2 years. And they're not the only ones in that situation. I mean, this is happening to financial services companies all up and down the East Coast, too, who are saying, we are an in-office culture. And by we, they mean I, the CEO, am an in-office person. And other people down in the organization are saying, well, why should I do that when I've been not only as productive as before working from home, but in many cases more productive? And that's the dilemma. You have to explain to your workers why they need to make that 45-minute commute, why they need to sit in that office and look at a laptop all day, which they could just do at home while also throwing their laundry in between meetings and having the flexibility that offers.
Yeah. There was an event scheduled for November that Forrester was going to do on technology and innovation. Did that happen, or did the pandemic force a change?
We went all virtual.
You did? Huh.
Yeah, we did. We had several events last year that we were hoping to do hybrid. And we had to shift to all virtual. The Delta wave was bad, and then the Omicron wave really just said, no, it's not time for this yet. So that said, our next 2 events, which will happen in May and June, we are doing hybrid. We are going to do in-person and remote, and that's a new skill for us. And this is part of what we're telling our client companies. This hybrid thing is new. Most companies know how to do everyone in the office, and most companies know how to do remote now because they've been doing wherever possible. They've been doing remote for the last 2 years. But having a significant number of your people work remote every day forever in a hybrid mode, where it might be, 40% of your workers aren't in the office on any given day. That's a big change.
Yeah.
And managers don't know how to manage to that. There's a lot of uncertainty in the cultural aspects of what it means to be a hybrid organization. I think that's one of the biggest questions we're getting from clients. And if I were looking at Amazon, which as far as I know is still saying we are an in-office culture, it might be purely because they know how to do that. It's easier to stick with what you know.
Yeah. Well, did you give your keynote virtually then? You were going to talk about how to make your people your key to your creativity, and that was the topic?
I did, yeah.
How does, I would think that there are interesting things to study and think about in a hybrid culture if you're really trying to have your people be the key to your creativity and what causes creativity and how is it more than a slogan. Have you come up with any ideas about doing that when some of the people are at home and some of the people are in the office?
Actually, this research has already been done. It's not widespread, so part of our job is to help spread it, but it's not our research. It's been done by academics at, everywhere from. It's interesting because I can say names like it's been done at University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Business, and it's been done. I can name the big colleges, Harvard, Stanford. But at those same universities, there are other professors who keep saying, oh, but we all need to go back to the office. So, but let me tell you what the actual studies say about whether or not people are creative when they are together versus when they are in remote configurations. And the answer is, depending on how you measure it, either no difference in creative output or slightly more creative when they are remote.
Interesting.
It all kind of depends on how you measure it. It all depends on the team configuration. Of course, in a culture where people say, well, we can't be creative unless we're all here together in the same room brainstorming, well, they've already self-defeated. And that's part of what we're trying to do is communicate to people that stop believing the idea that the only way to be creative is to all be in the same room. Because actually, getting everyone in the same room is already a constraining factor. And the number of first of all, who can all be physically present when now we've hired a whole bunch of people who aren't even close to headquarters during the pandemic? This has happened a lot. And then so is it that the 4 people who can be in the room are the ones who are creative and everyone else just listens in? That has been the case in a lot of these cultures in the past, because the person on the phone, on the bridge call back in the day before we were Zooming everywhere, would just sort of listen in and try to chime in once, when they could interrupt and make their point. So they'd say, oh, yeah, I need to be in the room to be creative. But if we move to all remote, or we develop the tools that allow us and the culture that allows us to give people the opportunity to express their ideas, it turns out, and this is the most counterintuitive finding, not being physically present with each other frees people psychologically to feel a little more willing to take risks and to say things that maybe they wouldn't say if they were in the room together with their boss or with that other person who always kind of looks a little gruff just because they have resting gruff face or something like that. You remove some of that, or you can if you encourage it. So anyway, we're not saying, oh, you'll be more creative automatically when you're in a remote or hybrid configuration. We're saying there's no reason that you can't be as creative. But one of the important things is it will depend on what technology tools you bring in for people to collaborate on. We're all used to the whiteboard idea as the center hub of collaboration, which if you think about it is kind of silly. Whiteboards are not great as a medium for generating new ideas, for sharing back ideas, for preserving ideas. There's always that time at the end of the meeting where someone pulls out their cell phone and takes a picture of the scribblings on the wall. And then what happens to that, honestly? How many times has that actually been transcribed? And pity the person who actually has to do that. But the tools now, we're seeing incredible tools that vendors have come up with that they don't even want to call them virtual whiteboards because that would just dumb down the expectation to such a low degree. We're seeing shared hybrid spaces online where, every reference that someone makes to a case study, you can drop in a link to the company's website, or you can paste in an image, or you can share a document that you were collaborating with someone on. And it all ends up being in the same virtual space so that you can say, all right, we're going to pick this up next week where we left off. And when you virtually return to that virtualized space, all of those resources are there. Some of the things you said have been transcribed and are automatically filed, and there's been some AI that's gone through and taxonomized all the things that were said to cluster them into groups and say it looked like there was a lot of energy here and there was a lot of energy there. And those things are now starting to emerge. But you, as an organization, you will not get that value if you don't create the cultural processes that say, let's use this technology this way. So most people are just using them as virtual whiteboards. And it's going to take some time, but I think people will realize that actually, even if we are all physically present in the same room, we're still going to want those collaboration tools to be in the room with us so that we can preserve that knowledge and carry our tasks forward with, instead of that email afterward that says, hey, great conversation, guys. Here's our to-dos and follow-ups for the next meeting. Those emails get lost and never returned to.
When you talk about it, I can imagine the meta. What is it called? Where you have a virtual shared work table and you can have people join you there, and you've got an avatar. I suppose you'd want to make sure your avatar doesn't have a resting grumpy face like you talked about. It's like a smiley face. Yeah. But creativity in that use of the metaverse, does that excite you? Is that something that looks pretty good?
It doesn't really. I don't think the metaverse, I like to describe it this way. If you were to say to someone in 1995, like, hey, cell phones are going to be everything. Mm-hmm. People would look at their cell phones in their pocket and say, you're kidding. This thing, the battery lasts for 45 minutes. I have to keep it constantly charged. And, Motorola's nice, but man, really? I'm not going to, this screen, this keyboard, that's where we are with the metaverse today. Yeah. We're really at maybe the Motorola stage, maybe the Nokia stage, but we are not to the BlackBerry at all. And certainly not the iPhone equivalent of metaverse. So, there's a lot that needs to happen in the metaverse before it becomes real, but we don't actually have to get to a full metaverse in order to have the value of a virtualized space. So, right now, I mean, our listeners can't see us, but we're looking at each other through a Zoom meeting. We're all used to that Brady Bunch, view of, 6 or 8 or however many faces are looking at the meeting at the same time. Well, the idea that the modes are either all of us looking at each other, or one of us is sharing our screen. Okay, that already shows that we're not being creative enough. There needs to be a way to put something in between all of us that we can all contribute to. I should be able to drag and drop things into a shared space. You should be able to open it and look at it and make comments on it and circle things and put it back in there. And a lot of people will say, well, yeah, we have that virtual whiteboarding tool. And I say, no, as long as the configuration is we are either all in the tool or we are all looking at each other's faces, we haven't realized the need for us to see each other while we're working together.
Right. Yeah.
That's something, and I understand it's a complex task, especially as a lot of people are doing these kinds of meetings on their phones where they don't have the real estate for that. I mean, in my ideal world, I actually would use 2 screens, and I have done this before when I lead workshops with clients. I'll log in twice. I log in on the one that has everybody's faces, and then I log in on the one where I'm going to show my slides, and that way I can have a much more natural interaction with them. And see if they're listening, what they're responding to, if they want to make a contribution in that. But see, I have to DIY that. The tool doesn't invite that and doesn't make it clear to everyone that that's the experience we're reaching for. So we don't have to go metaverse to get a lot more value out of our current tools than we currently get.
There's a fascinating thing I've been trying with my grandsons who are 8 and 6 up in Lexington, Amazon Glow. And it's this, there's a screen where I'm on my iPad and I can see them. They've got like a white surface that the Glow projects games, checkers, books, all kinds of stuff. So, and they can like play in the real world on this surface. They can even scan stuff. My youngest grandson said, watch this, Grandpa. He puts his hand down and scans it, and then the hand becomes something we can move around on my screen and theirs. And one of the things they did I thought was cool is I can't see my image on when I'm doing this. All I can see is their image. And my daughter said, that's pretty smart because these kids are so transfixed by their own image that when they're on Zoom, they keep looking at their image and they get distracted. But this thing, they forget that they're being filmed and they just see me and they see the game. And it strikes me as an example of maybe some of the things you're talking about. I can picture a whole, kids-oriented team at Amazon refining this and coming up with what are the things that will keep a grandchild engaged virtually with a grandparent for an hour instead of 10 minutes, which is the normal time for a FaceTime. Limits. They just wander off, and it really works. I mean, and they can call me. I'll be sitting here, all of a sudden there's a call on the Glow from Ryan and Jake, but there's a sort of custom built hardware that really helps engagement, in this case with a very specific audience, grandparents and grandkids.
Actually, this is where we're seeing the most innovation currently, is in the custom-built hardware space, because we are so limited by our laptop cameras and our laptop screens, and how few of our laptop screens are touch screens also limits. I happen to be a touchscreen guy because I'm a Microsoft Surface user. So all three of the computers I use for work are touchscreens. So I have a little more tactile interaction capacity that I can do a virtual whiteboarding experience. But it's really the custom hardware. I mean, Facebook with its Portal line of conferencing devices, those are some of them touchscreen and are also completely different camera experiences. Amazon also got into this, where they have the camera follow you around the room, and not only follow you, but have the screen pivot toward you as you move around the room, so you can do the kind of talk while you're in the kitchen use case scenario, which is a very common use case. So it's not surprising that that's one that they've decided to invest in. But the custom built hardware, in the end, it's only going to apply to the one or two case studies that they've designed it for: the grandparent case study, the kitchen case study, and what I imagine might have to happen is an open standard for multiple cameras talking the same language to each other, multiple sensors, multiple screens talking the same language, so that wherever I am, I can tell all the sensors in my room to share me with my grandsons, to use your example. And that could happen. I don't have to be in front of that one piece of dedicated hardware for that experience to occur. Now, I'm getting fanciful at this point, but it's not impossible to imagine that world. And of course, if you're Amazon, you think, oh, we'll solve that by putting one of these devices in every single one of your rooms. That's always been, you and I have talked about that from the very beginning. It's always been, Alexas per household. That's been the metric that they want to go for. But I wonder if we might not end up with a more interesting world if there were an open platform and an open language that would allow me to just walk in the kitchen and say, hey, reach out to my parents or to my grandkids. And because in my kitchen, you can imagine me, we have an Alexa device with a screen. We have a Bixby-equipped refrigerator from Samsung, which has a huge and beautiful screen on it, touch screen, and cameras. There's cameras inside the fridge. And then I have my phone, and sometimes I'll carry in a Portal device, which we have in the next room over. So imagine if all of those things could essentially allow, a little bit like the NFL does today, since we had the Super Bowl last week. The NFL can capture any play from all these angles and can three-dimensionally recreate unique angles and rotate around the action. We're seeing that at the Olympics right now as well. It's really quite wonderful to watch some of those. Eileen Gu do her amazing tricks in the half pipe, and then they can freeze her in the air and rotate that image. And that's because they have total control over all the cameras, and they can intelligently piece that together. Well, we've got enough cameras. We have enough processing power in any one of our homes to do that kind of experience, where as I turn from one camera to another, my grandkids get a different view of me. Or I can direct them to look at what I'm doing as I'm mixing up the biscuits that I'm, cooking and wishing they could be there to eat. Those kinds of experiences will be much more natural. Now, Terry, take that into a workplace scenario. And that's similarly where it's going to have to end, which is every conference room has multiple sensors in it, multiple microphones, multiple cameras, multiple screen options, including the ability to use your own personal screens as a screen in that configuration. But that is a massive build out that companies don't know how to do yet. And we talk to hardware vendors, and we also talk to real estate developers who are thinking about building office parks because they're scared right now. They can sell lab space to, pharma companies and health tech companies, but they're worried they're going to lose all of their white collar clients. And so they're thinking, how do we make these environments? How do we build office spaces that companies want to come and lease from us because we've pre-equipped it with all of this technology that will be intelligent and able to create this hybrid engagement where the people outside of the office feel just as present as the people who are in the office on any given day. So there's a lot that needs to happen. There's going to be some significant investment here in the next 5 years, but by the time we get to 2030, some of what I'm talking about is going to be really common in a way that, in 2002, if you'd seen the first version of the iPod, which was a year old by that point, if I were to say to you then with clarity, oh, someday this device will also have a touchscreen and a camera and all this, you'd say, oh, okay, that's really, really far out. But actually the iPhone came out 5 years later. Mm-hmm. And that gap from 2002 to 2007 is not a very long amount of time, but the technological revolutions that occurred were vast and continue to reverberate today. And I think that's where we are in some of this technology right now.
Yeah. Fascinating as always. I have been speaking with James McQuivey, Vice President and Research Director at Forrester Research. Thanks very much, James.
So glad to be with you, Len. Thank you.
Hey, is that a new title? I pulled that off the website.
It is. Yeah.
Have you been promoted?
No, not promoted per se. They've been asking me to consider different research director positions for years. And this future of work team that I have been kind of shadow leading for a couple of years, it's such a great team. I work with some of the best people ever. And we're doing things that I really, really care about. And I started to say, you know what, I want to continue to shape this work. So I raised my hand and said, all right, I will finally be a research director. And they were thrilled. This company has been very, very good to me. And they said, all right. In fact, the CEO of the company said to my boss, I said, how did you get James to take this position? And I said to my boss later, I said, if he ever asks you that again, tell him this team at this time, yes. Yeah. That's for the perfect storm of what we're doing. The future of work is so crucial, and I think it can make a big difference in the way people experience work. And I think that's positive for everyone involved.
And you have a benefit because you're working with this team on a sustained basis, which means you can kind of dig deeper into the topic than if it was part of a wider portfolio.
Well, it is. I can go deeper in the topic, but I also feel like the fact that I did 20 years as a consumer technology analyst first gives me a way to say, look, let's come and look at the future of work from the perspective of how do we get people to adopt that? Will they ever use that technology? This is the things that we were asking from all of these, TiVo, from iPod, all of these things we've been asking for, 25 years that I've been out of grad school. Is it that long? I can't believe it. And it's all in service now of how do we rapidly get the workplace to catch up to what consumers have experienced in the last, 20 some odd years. And I enjoy knowing that in this case, look, if Nike sells you a fuel band, which is no longer a thing anymore, but back when it was, that might be a good thing for Nike. It might be a good thing for you for a while. But you don't engage Nike 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Your workplace, you do. Whether it's physically or virtually, whether you're there, it doesn't matter. You are connected to this company, 5, sometimes 6 days a week. And creating even a 10% lift in your experience there, that's meaningful change, which is not the case about selling someone a Barnes & Noble Nook. Right. As much as I loved that product, and it was ahead of the Amazon Kindle devices, usually like 6 months ahead of them on every. I loved the Nook, but that's not as powerful an agent of shaping how people experience their day-to-day lives as the workplace is. So I'm very excited to be a part of what we're doing. Good. Well, that'll be a good topic for future conversations. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Take care, James. All right, Len. It's good to talk to you. Take care. Likewise. Bye. Bye. As I listened to our conversation, I realized we did talk a lot about the future of work in talking about hybrid work at the office and at home, creativity, and some of the tools. So you can see some of the things that James is working on in his new role as Director of Research for the Future of Work team. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of
fascinating work that he's going to be doing on that in the future. One thing that really jumped out at me in listening to it is the term mental flexibility, and the finding that the men that are surveyed in his survey work, who rate themselves 5 out of 5, saying that they consider themselves very masculine, they show more mental flexibility than other men that rate themselves lower. And I think certainly James shows that, the mental flexibility it takes to do a project like this. He's doing this one on his own, as he says. It's not a Forrester project. It takes some boldness. It takes some, there's kind of a zany energy that shows up in these videos that is part of how he is exercising a different part of his mind, mental flexibility. And that's something I just prize lately. I think, our time here on Sanibel, we've had some surprisingly tough times with Darlene being in the hospital, but she's much better now. We're really back on track. But at 71, if I were to describe where I hope I'm going, it would land in the area of mental flexibility. Can I change my mind about things like how important is it that I follow the daily news and that I follow Twitter? Well, it's coming up in a year when I basically disengage from social media of any kind. But I do read The New Yorker and The Economist and Vanity Fair and The Atlantic. I get a sort of moderated view of what's going on. But I didn't know for 24 hours that the Russians had actually invaded Ukraine. And I felt a little sheepish about it, but then I thought, okay, it happened. Everybody knew it was going to happen, and now it's happening. And I attended a webinar that The Economist had where they had all their top people talking about it. So I don't feel like I'm disengaging from the news, but I have totally broken old habits that I thought I would never be able to break, about just taking the news in on my nerve endings by, constantly checking Twitter every 20 minutes and all the rest. So to have mental flexibility, to have the ability to change my mind, how does meditation fit into the day? I'm constantly experimenting about that, and I've talked about it pretty regularly on the Morning Journal. So there was a lot that resonated in this conversation, as is usually the case when I have a chance to catch up with James McQuivey. One of the real treasures of my time doing this podcast has been the relationship that we've developed and the ease of conversation that we have when we get together, no matter how many months have passed by since the last time. So I hope you enjoyed it. And let's see, we've got Rod and Connie, Darlene's brother and wife are here. Rod had a bad fall on a pickleball court today, and they had invited me, urged me quite strongly, Len, you should go. Pickleball is really great. You should come and take this lesson. I said, well, I'm going to attend this Economist webinar on Ukraine, and I've got bad knees. I just don't see myself playing pickleball. So I felt really bad. He fractured and several ribs. He's in a great deal of pain, and when you mess up with a rib, it takes months and sometimes years to recover. So that's they were going to be driving off to Texas and then Denver. He may be staying longer, but we really enjoy having them here. And if their stay is extended because of this injury, that will be sad, but we'll still be glad to have them here. And the weather's warming up. We had some cold weather, but I've been swimming in the ocean, and my daughter Rue and Mike and the two grandsons, Jake and Ryan, are going to be here in a couple of weeks. We're going to have a week full of kid energy, roaming the island and doing fun stuff on bikes and at the beach. So there's lots going on here. This has pretty definitively become a new happy place for me and for Darlene too. So we're very grateful. Thanks for listening, and I'm not sure who I'll be talking to next month, but we'll come up with something that intriguing, I hope. And if you haven't listen to the Morning Journal. I urge you to try. I've had some very nice emails from people that I didn't know were following it, and something will come up and say, boy, this really made me think. And the way you do it is just tell your Echo device, enable Morning Journal, and that's how that skill gets enabled. And then each weekday when I put it up, you can just say, Alexa Flash, and it'll come up. Okay, it's getting time for bed, and Darlene will be in here, hoping I'm not talking on the microphone. And thanks for joining me. Have a good day. Bye.